Lately, there has been a lot of debate about the concept of power scaling in the Invincible series, especially because it seems to be inconsistent. The accusation is that Mark Grayson apparently does not use the same strength to fight smaller villains on Earth as he did with Conquest. It makes sense, right? If he had the potential to take down villains like Mister Liu so easily, why did he allow them to make him eat dust for so long before he finally took them down? According to Robert Kirkman, it is a matter of adrenaline and determination, because while fighting Liu, Invincible was on a job, but his battle with Conquest was more personal. So automatically he was more focused, determined, and his adrenaline was higher than it had ever been. As a comic reader myself, I find myself going back to the comic panels every time Kirkman releases a new episode, and I must say that one of the best parts of this franchise is the massive power levels shown by its major characters. If you read the comics, you know how power scaling among the Viltrumites work, and so far, it is assumed that Grand Regent Thragg is the strongest and pretty much unbeatable Viltrumite to ever exist. But given how in the comics, Mark was forced to become much stronger against his real enemies, and over time evolved to become even more accomplished than Omni-Man himself, do we really think Thragg tops the power charts? Well, without wasting another moment, let's find out who is potentially the most powerful Viltrumite to ever exist in the Invincible lore. It really takes one Google search to find out that Grand Regent Thragg has always been considered to be the most powerful in the universe. So much so that even a psychotic dude like Conquest was scared of him. Thragg is seen to be nothing but ruthless from the moment he appears in the comics. Conquest at least lived for the thrill of the battle. Killing was more of a sport for him, which was evident when he licked off Eve's blood from his finger after seemingly killing her during Mark's first fight with him. Thragg, on the other hand, does not beat around the bush as he goes directly for the kill, inflicting 100% damage even more when his opponent sees it coming. In fact, he rarely ever wastes any effort, as each move he makes is with the intention and purpose to kill, be it disabling his opponents with bone-crushing punches or executing surgical strikes to fully incapacitate his adversaries. But what made him such a ruthless warrior even for a Viltrumite? Well, you have to understand that Thragg was the son of Emperor Argyle's closest advisors. So from the moment he was born till Argyle's assassination, he was made to go through rigorous training in all forms of combat within the Viltrum Empire. He was literally bred to be the strongest guy out there, and I'm guessing any weakness that might have existed in the guy was probably trained out of him in his formative years. It is said that as he knew the Emperor personally, a young Thragg was inspired to realize his own potential and emerge as the strongest warrior in the history of Viltrum. However, one day, darkness dawned on the Empire as the Emperor was assassinated by one of their own, sending the entire planet into a state of complete disarray. Just a few days after this, all Viltrumites engaged in the brutal civil war now known as the Great Purge in order to restore order within the Empire by expelling even the slightest hint of weakness. By the end of the Purge, Thragg rose as one of the strongest survivors, and soon the Viltrumites emerged as an unbeatable race under his leadership. The Viltrumite Council then designated him as the first ever Grand Regent of the Viltrum Empire and gave him the task of avenging the late Emperor's death, while also finding the lost heir of Argyle. Ever since then, Thragg ruled Viltrum with an iron fist and always kept Argyle's skull close to him as a reminder for him to never let his homeworld into disarray again. Under his reign, the Empire completely rejected Argyle's original methods and centered it completely on the basis of strength. Thragg only had one motto, and that was to rule over all planets within Viltrum's galaxy before eventually traveling far to conquer other planets. Soon after, the deadly Scourge virus left Viltrum in absolute devastation as it completely depleted their ranks by directly targeting their DNA, leaving only 50 Viltrumites alive. While Thragg was also affected, his stronger immune system saved him, and ever since then, he turned the Empire into a tomb by choosing to protect this news as their greatest secret from enemies and allies alike. During this time, Thragg had already stopped all his efforts to find Argyle's true heir, as he believed the guy had succumbed to the virus. But after coming to the conclusion that he was the one to save the Viltrumite race from extinction, Thragg felt that he had earned his command. At this point, this guy was already thousands of years old, and if you know anything about Viltrumite anatomy, you probably know that these guys age like wine because the older they get, the stronger they become. So this means that by the time of the Viltrumite War, Thragg had been around for aeons. Even Thaddeus, who is probably as old as Argyle would have been if he were alive, knew that Thragg was not so someone to be effed with. This is why when the Coalition decides to take the fight directly to Viltrum, it engages directly with Thragg and his army. Thaddeus repeatedly asks Mark and Oliver to restrain themselves from directly engaging him. During this time, Mark had already killed Conquest and survived a severe case of near-death disembowelment after being in a 2-month-long coma. So automatically he came back more powerful than before because, according to the genetic makeup of Viltrumites, they always become 100 times stronger post a near-death experience. Even then, when Mark directly went for Thragg, he simply got smacked away. This was followed up by Oliver, who mocked the Grand Regent before trying to land a punch on him. In response, Thragg caught Oliver's punch and then literally ripped his entire arm from his shoulder before completely breaking his jaw, nearly killing Oliver in the process. Invincible absolutely lost it after believing his brother was dead and then kept attacking Thragg, but all that damage only led to the guy suffering a nosebleed. Later, when Thaddeus ordered Space Racer to blow up Viltrum's core with his Infinity Ray Gun and destroy Viltrum in the process, that is when we see Thragg truly enraged, as he blamed the Betrayer for destroying Viltrum's history, heritage, and now the planet itself. When Thaddeus offered him a chance to surrender, that is when Thragg rushed to sever the Betrayer's head from his shoulder and then crushed his decapitated skull to finally avenge the death of Argyll. Thaddeus had probably been thousands of years older than Thragg, and even then the latter was powerful. At that point, Thragg threatened to kill anyone who opposed him. Luckily, the Viltrumite War ended in an unwilling truce as Thragg agreed to surrender if the Viltrumites could live among humans to procreate and replenish their ranks. I'm pretty sure that if either side opposed it, the loss for the Coalition would have been devastating because both Nolan and Mark were no match against Thragg's might at this point. Following this, at some point in the comics, Mark gets accidentally infected with the Scourge virus, and because the truce was still being held on both ends, Thragg took him into Viltrumite quarantine. During that time, one of his scientists told him that Mark's DNA matched with Argyll's and that he is the late Emperor's grandson, thus making Nolan the true heir of Viltrum. Thragg immediately felt threatened by the news and killed the scientist to stop the truth from getting out. In order to prevent his reign, the Grand Regent then tried to strangle Mark while he was still healing, but was surprisingly interrupted by Dinosaurus, who along with Eve ended up saving Mark's life. Thragg then spies on Nolan and Debbie while they are on the other side of the moon and rushes to attack them. Initially, Nolan was confused, but after Thragg told him of his true lineage, he seriously refused to fight Thragg. However, the Grand Regent was not having it and would have probably killed Nolan if it were not for Craig, Anissa, Lucan, and Thula showing up in time. After realizing Nolan was Argyll's son, they all turned on Thragg and tried to kill him, but unfortunately, Nolan made the mistake of sparing his life and sending him into exile. During his exile, Thragg occupied Thraxa and fathered thousands of Viltrumite hybrids in order to form his own army. Sometime later, the Coalition sent Battle Beast to kill Thragg, and that battle raged on for days, as both fought one another while being disemboweled. Ultimately, it ended with Battle Beast's death as Thragg crushed his heart. This was a near-death experience for Thragg as it left him unconscious for days, but of course, he came back only stronger. Ever since then, in order to avoid being caught by the Coalition, Thragg went on the run across the cosmos with his army of hybrid children. Later, during the comic book's 5-year time jump, all of Thragg's children had grown up as he kept rebuilding the ranks of the Viltrum Empire. After realizing that Mark had woken up from his coma, Thragg ordered his daughter Ursel and his son Onan to kill Invincible. At this point, Oliver was a double agent for the Coalition and for Thragg, so the latter informed him about his plan to kill Mark. When Thragg finally arrives, he goes for Mark's little daughter, Tara, but Oliver arrives in time to help her escape. Unfortunately, only a short battle later, Thragg pierces through Oliver's body and kills him right in front of Tara. When Mark threatened to kill Onan, he did not allow him to leave. Thragg still did not pay heed, so Invincible finally stopped playing by the rules and killed Onan before attacking Thragg. Sadly, Thragg ended up ripping Mark in half, while Ursal killed Eve before leaving Tara to die. Luckily, Eve's powers resurrected them, even though it was too late for Oliver. On another note, it is assumed that after being regenerated with the help of Eve's powers, Mark came back a lot stronger than anyone had imagined, and that is what helped him fight his final battle with Thragg. During the final war, Nolan and Thragg faced each other, and while Nolan tries his best, Thragg overpowers him by breaking Nolan's hand with a headbutt. When Mark tries to stop him, Thragg pretty much grabs Invincible and throws him away before focusing back on Nolan. Before long, Thragg swipes his hand through Nolan's body and tears his heart out, thus killing Omni-Man for good. Naturally, the death of his father made Mark furious, and he charged directly at Thragg, who now began to use his children as projectiles and started throwing them towards him, causing them to splatter on Mark's body, as he was too strong for them. At this point, Invincible was so disgusted by Thragg that he grabbed and pulled them both directly into the sun for the final fight. They keep fighting as the sun burns their bodies, and when Thragg tries to escape, Mark further pulls both of them into the core of the sun, which burns the flesh off of their bodies. The fight got so intense that Mark could no longer hear his own thoughts, but he still kept describing how Thragg and his archaic practices were responsible for the fall of Viltrum. Amidst all of this, Mark gained an upper hand when one of Robot's armor arrived to attach to him and granted him some form of protection from the searing heat as Thragg continued to burn. But as they kept fighting, the explosive lava from the sun ended up melting the armor off of Invincible's body. Although Thragg and Mark's bodies had become unrecognizable, they still continued hitting one another just inches away from the sun. At the end, because Thragg had sustained far more damage, he broke Mark's arm out of desperation, but Invincible was quick enough to kill his greatest enemy by using his teeth to rip out Thragg's throat and finally killing him. At this point, Mark finally let go and was fully ready to meet his end. However, Alan showed up to carry him to safety as Thragg's corpse got consumed by the sun. Now that you have an idea of just how powerful Thragg was as compared to Invincible, who also went through some major power upgrades multiple times, we can circle back to answering the main question. Given that Thragg was written to be undefeatable as the most powerful being in the universe, it makes sense for him to meet his end at Mark's hand. I mean, he is the literal big bad of the series and has truly done some inexplicably horrible things throughout his very long time, so his end was inevitable, but even then, in the end, Invincible could have taken him down alone if Robot had not helped him in the final moments of the battle, thus allowing Thragg to suffer more damage before his final defeat. Not just that, in Invincible it actually makes more sense for the story if Thragg is still physically stronger than Mark by the time they face off for the last time. If Mark had won simply by becoming more powerful, I think it would have weakened the deeper message the comic series was trying to convey. And now I agree that Thragg died as the strongest Viltrumite, but Mark Grayson was forced to become much stronger to compete against the foes he faced, and he still flat out failed, or just barely succeeded. On more than one occasion, but in the end, every life-threatening battle made him stronger. That level of determination, adrenaline, and focus is what allowed Mark to evenly match Thragg's aggression in their final fight. Mind you, at this point, Thragg was thousands of years old as opposed to Mark, who had not even lived for a century. According to that logic, even if Thragg were allowed to grow old until the end of the comic, Mark would still power up to become the strongest Viltrumite to ever exist. By the end of Invincible, in issue 144, Mark has lived for an entire millennium as the strongest Viltrumite to ever exist, and during his reign, he had rendered the Coalition obsolete after ushering every planet into an unending age of peace. While he preferred diplomacy, Mark could still physically defend his position as the most powerful being in the universe, and I'm pretty sure if Thragg were alive by this time, he would either be equally matched to Invincible's strength or be trumped by it. But that is just my 2 cents because I genuinely believe by the end of the Invincible lore, Mark was the strongest Viltrumite to ever exist. But what do you guys think? Let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comment box down below.